The first sign that Anna's perfect life was a lie wasn't a lipstick stain or a suspicious credit card bill. It was a ghost in the machine. A sleek, black burner phone hidden in the secret compartment of her husband Jace's briefcase. 7 months pregnant and cocooned in the sterile luxury of their Atherton mansion, Anna had stumbled upon it by accident. But what she saw on that screen was no accident. A single message from a name she'd only heard in Jace's hushed, late-night whispers. It wasn't about an affair. It was about something so much bigger, so much more terrifying that it would unravel their entire world. That night, she wouldn't just be a betrayed wife, she would become a whistleblower. And the call she was about to make to the IRS would be the first shot in a war she never knew she was fighting. The air in their Atherton, California mansion was always a perfectly calibrated 72 degrees, a climate-controlled bubble that smelled faintly of Joe Malone candles and the fresh-cut lilies delivered twice a week. It was the scent of serene, untouchable wealth, an atmosphere Anna had learned to breathe as if it were her native air. 5 years ago, she had been Anna Davenport, a bright, ambitious art curator with a sharp eye for talent and a modest but fulfilling life. Then, Jace Fenwick had walked into her gallery, a force of nature in a Tom Ford suit. He wasn't just a man, he was a phenomenon, a whirlwind of charisma, ambition, and a smile that seemed to physically disarm anyone in its radius. He hadn't just bought a painting that day, he had, in his quietly determined way, acquired her. Their life together was a meticulously curated masterpiece of happiness. Weekends were spent at their sun-drenched vineyard in Napa, a sprawling estate named Serafina's Vineyard, after Jace's mother. Their evenings were a blur of charity galas, where their photograph was a society page staple, and last-minute flights to Paris for anniversary dinners at Le Jules Verne, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. Jace was the architect of this perfect existence, and Anna, his beautiful, adoring wife, was its most cherished feature. Now, at 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son they had already named Spencer, Anna felt she was living a reality more magical than any fairy tale. Jace was ecstatic, a doting, attentive father-to-be. He would rest his hand on her swollen belly, a look of genuine awe on his face, and whisper promises of a future filled with love, legacy, and a dynasty of their own making. He was in every conceivable way the perfect husband. The first discordant note in their perfect symphony was so subtle it was almost imperceptible. It was a slight shift in Jace's habits, a change in the rhythm of their life. He had always been a workaholic, the celebrated CEO of Fenwick Holdings, a sprawling empire of lucrative real estate and cutting-edge tech startups. But recently, his late nights at the office had stretched into the pre-dawn hours. His business trips, once meticulously planned and shared, became more frequent and shrouded in a new, unsettling secrecy. He began taking calls in his study with the door firmly, uncharacteristically closed. His voice when she passed by was a low, urgent murmur, a tone she had never heard him use before. When she gently pressed him for details, he flashed that devastating smile, the one that always made her feel foolish for doubting him, and blamed it on a new, highly sensitive merger. "Just a few more weeks, my love," he'd promised, his lips brushing her forehead. "Then it's just you, me, and Spencer against the world." She had wanted to believe him. She had clung to his words with a desperate, white-knuckled grip. But a woman's intuition, especially a pregnant woman's, is a powerful primal force, and Anna's was screaming a silent, high-pitched alarm. The vague, formless unease solidified into a cold, hard knot of dread the previous week. Jace had been in their cavernous marble-clad shower, the steam billowing out into the bedroom. His briefcase, an imposing fortress of black Italian leather, lay open on their bed. His primary phone, the one she knew, the one filled with pictures of them and their golden retriever Winston, lay on the nightstand. But as she walked past the briefcase, her eye caught on a sliver of black plastic peeking from a hidden zip-up side pocket she'd never noticed before. It was another phone, a sleek, anonymous-looking burner phone. Her blood ran cold. The discovery was so incongruous with the man she knew. Jace was a man of streamlined efficiency, a devotee of minimalism in all things. One phone, one number was his mantra. 2 phones is the mark of a man with 2 lives, he had once joked. The memory now felt less like a joke and more like a confession. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, her mind a chaotic whirlwind of justifications. It's an old phone he forgot about. It's for international travel, to avoid roaming charges. There's a perfectly logical explanation. But her gut, that primal screaming voice, told her otherwise. With a deep shuddering breath, she powered it on. Her heart pounded a frantic, suffocating rhythm against her ribs. The screen lit up, blessedly free of a passcode. And there it was. A single unread message preview on the screen, a notification that seared itself into her brain. It wasn't from a woman, not in the way she had morbidly feared. It was a cryptic string of numbers and letters, a code that made no sense to her. But it was the sender that had made her gasp a name that she recognized from the hushed, anxious whispers of Jace's late-night calls from his study, Mikhail. She had shoved the phone back into its hiding place, her hands clammy, her mind reeling. Mikhail. The name was a ghost in their perfect life, a phantom she couldn't grasp. Jace had mentioned him only once dismissively as a difficult and demanding overseas investor. But the secrecy, the burner phone, the coded message, it all pointed to something far more sinister than a demanding business partner. For a week, she had lived with the corrosive secret, the knowledge of the phone, a toxic presence in their home. The lie was a third person in their marriage, a silent, mocking guest at their dinner table. She had watched Jace searching his face for a crack in his flawless facade, a flicker of deceit in his loving eyes. But he was a master of deception, his performance flawless. He was the doting husband, the excited father-to-be, the titan of industry. And she was the adoring wife, her smile a little too bright, her laughter a little too brittle, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. Tonight, the charade had become unbearable. Jace had come home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint, unidentifiable perfume that clung to the lapels of his suit jacket. It was a sweet, cloying scent, nothing like her own. He had been distracted during their evening ritual, his eyes distant, even as he had gone through the motions of a shared cup of herbal tea. A hand on her belly, a soft, meaningless kiss on her lips. As he slept beside her now, a stranger in their shared bed, Anna knew she couldn't live in the suffocating shadows of his secrets any longer. The truth, no matter how ugly, was better than the slow, soul-crushing poison of suspicion. Slipping out of bed, her bare feet silent on the plush, hand-woven silk carpet, she moved towards his briefcase, a monolith of black leather in the moonlit room. Her hands, surprisingly steady now, found the hidden compartment. The burner phone felt cold and alien in her palm, a talisman of a world she was not supposed to know existed. Taking a deep breath, she retreated to the one place in the mansion that felt truly hers, her art studio. The studio was her sanctuary, a sprawling, light-filled space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering, sprawling expanse of Silicon Valley. Canvases in various stages of completion lined the walls, her own vibrant, abstract creations a stark emotional contrast to the sterile, calculated perfection of the rest of the house. Here, amidst the familiar, comforting scent of oil paint and turpentine, she felt a flicker of her old self, the independent, resilient woman she had been before she became Mrs. Jace Fenwick. With trembling fingers, she powered on the phone. The cryptic message from Mikhail was still there, a mocking testament to her week of silent torment. But now she had time. Now she could delve deeper into the rabbit hole. She started with the call log. A handful of numbers, all international prefixes: Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, Russia, all dialed in the dead of night. Then she moved to the messages. Her blood turned to ice in her veins as she scrolled. The messages were a horrifying, multi-layered tapestry of deceit. There were, as she had begun to suspect, threads of a passionate, long-running affair with a woman named Katia, a name that now made the faint, foreign perfume on Jace's jacket make a sickening kind of sense. The messages were explicit, filled with a raw, desperate passion that Jace had never in their 5 years of marriage shown her. They spoke of stolen weekends in the Cayman Islands, of a life they dreamed of together, a life free from the golden cage of his marriage and his ice queen wife. Anna felt a wave of nausea, so intense she had to grip the edge of her work table to keep from collapsing. The fairy tale was a lie. The perfect husband was a stranger. Her entire life was a sham. But the affair, as devastating and soul-crushing as it was just the tip of the iceberg. As she scrolled further, her horror curdled into a cold, terrifying understanding. The cryptic messages from Mikhail were not about a difficult investor. They were about something far more dangerous. They were a complex web of coded instructions, of offshore accounts with names that sounded like something out of a spy novel: Project Nightingale, the Lazarus Fund, the Geneva Protocol. There were references to shell corporations, asset concealment, and capital flight. It was the language of high-level financial crime, of a massive, audacious scheme to defraud the U.S. government of a staggering amount of money. Anna, the art curator, the woman who had once prided herself on her sharp eye for detail and authenticity, now saw the full grotesque picture. Jace wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a criminal. A man who had built their gilded life, their perfect world, on a foundation of lies and illegal activities. The trips to the Cayman Islands weren't just for trysts with his mistress, they were for laundering money. The late-night calls weren't about a merger, they were about hiding millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars, from the Internal Revenue Service. Her mind raced, connecting the dots with a terrifying, sickening clarity. The new tech startups he had been so excited about, the ones that had appeared out of nowhere and were suddenly valued in the billions. They were likely the shell corporations, the difficult overseas investors. They were his co-conspirators. And the man she had loved, the man whose child she was carrying, was the mastermind behind it all. A new kind of anger, cold and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the white-hot pain of his betrayal. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about their son. What kind of a world was she bringing him into? A world built on a lie. A world where his father was a fugitive in the making. The thought of Spencer, her innocent unborn son, being tainted by this filth of his inheritance, being a legacy of crime and deceit, was more than she could bear. She looked around her studio at the vibrant, expressive canvases that represented her soul, her passion her truth. And then she looked at the burner phone in her hand, a sleek black symbol of the ugly, corrosive lies that had poisoned her life. She had a choice. She could confront Jace, become another screaming headline in a messy, high-profile divorce. She could take a settlement, a fraction of his stolen fortune, and disappear forever, looking over her shoulder, a prisoner of his secrets. Or she could do something else, something that terrified her to her very core, but also filled her with a sense of righteous cleansing fury. She could burn it all down. Not just her marriage, but his entire criminal empire. She could be the one to expose him, to bring the whole rotten edifice crashing down around him. Her eyes fell on a half-finished canvas in the corner, a chaotic swirl of angry reds and deep bruised purples. She had started it a few days ago, in a fit of an unnamed, directionless anxiety. Now, she understood the emotion behind the colors. It was the color of betrayal, of a heart shattered into a million pieces. With a newfound steely resolve, she picked up her own phone, the one Jace knew about, the one that connected her to the real world. Her fingers, no longer trembling, moved with a grim, deliberate purpose. She opened a web browser, the stark white of the search bar, a blank slate for her new, terrifying reality. She typed in the 3 letters that would change her life and his forever. IRS. She found the whistleblower office hotline, the number a beacon, in the suffocating darkness of her despair. She stared at it for a long, silent moment, the phone in her hand, feeling impossibly heavy, a weapon she was about to turn on her own life. This was the point of no return. The moment she made this call, she was no longer just a wronged wife. She was an informant, a key witness in a federal investigation. She was declaring war on her own husband, the father of her child. She thought of Spencer, of the life she wanted for him, a life of honesty and integrity, a life free from the long, dark shadow of his father's crimes. And in that moment, her choice became clear. It wasn't a choice at all. It was a necessity. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, a breath that felt like it was tearing her soul in two, she pressed the call button. The line began to ring, each ring a death knell, for the life she had known, for the woman she had been. Internal Revenue Service Whistleblower Office, a calm, professional, and utterly anonymous voice answered on the other end of the line. "How can I help you?" Anna closed her eyes, a single hot tear tracing a path down her cheek, a final farewell to her shattered fairy tale. "My name is Anna Fenwick," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper, but filled with a steely resolve she didn't know she possessed. "And I have information about my husband, Jace Fenwick. Information I believe you'll find very interesting." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. And in that silence, Anna Fenwick, the pregnant wife of a millionaire, felt the last vestiges of her old life crumble to dust, replaced by the terrifying, uncertain, but ultimately liberating dawn of a new one. The call was made. The die was cast. And there was no turning back. The voice on the other end of the line, a man who introduced himself as Agent David Miller, was a study in practiced calm. He didn't betray a hint of surprise, no flicker of excitement at the mention of Jace Fenwick's name, a name that regularly graced the pages of Fortune and Forbes. It was a chilling reminder that for him, this was just another call, another thread in the vast tangled web of financial crime he navigated daily. For Anna, it was the detonation of her entire world. "Mrs. Fenwick," he said, his voice even and measured, "can you tell me in your own words what kind of information you have?" "In my own words." The phrase felt like a cruel joke. What words could possibly encapsulate the maelstrom of emotions that was tearing her apart? The white-hot rage of betrayal, the icy fear of what Jace was capable of, the fierce, protective love for her unborn child that was fueling this desperate, life-altering act. She took a shaky breath, the familiar scent of turpentine and oil paint in her studio, a grounding force in the chaos of her mind. "My husband," she began, her voice gaining a fragile strength with each word, "is not the man he appears to be. He has a second phone, a burner phone. I found it tonight. It's filled with evidence. Evidence of an affair, yes, but much more than that. It's evidence of a massive financial conspiracy. He's using a network of shell corporations to hide money, millions of dollars from the government. He's working with foreign nationals, a man named Mikhail, and they're moving money offshore to Swiss accounts." She relayed the names of the offshore accounts she had seen: Project Nightingale, the Lazarus Fund, the cryptic phrases that had once been meaningless but now held the weight of Jace's crimes. She described the coded messages, the late-night calls, the sudden and inexplicable explosion of wealth from his new opaque tech startups. She spoke for what felt like an eternity, her voice a low, urgent murmur in the quiet of her studio, the only sound the frantic beating of her own heart. Agent Miller listened patiently, his silence punctuated by the occasional, "I see," or "Can you spell that name for me, please?" He was a faceless voice on the other end of a phone line, but in that moment, he was her only lifeline, her only hope of finding solid ground in the churning sea of her husband's deceit. When she finally finished, her throat raw, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, there was a long pause. For a terrifying moment, she thought he didn't believe her, that he would dismiss her as a hysterical, vengeful wife looking for a payday. "Mrs. Fenwick," he said at last, his voice taking on a new, more serious tone, "what you've described is significant. We will need to meet in person as soon as possible, but I need to be very clear with you. If what you're saying is true, and we have every reason to believe it is, this will be a long and difficult process, and potentially a very dangerous one for you." The word dangerous hung in the air between them, a cold, sharp-edged thing. Anna's hand instinctively went to her belly, a protective shield over her unborn son. She had known this was a risk, but hearing it articulated by a federal agent made the threat terrifyingly real. Jace was a man who had built an empire on his ability to control, to manipulate, to win at all costs. What would he do to the woman who threatened to bring it all crashing down? "I understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But she did. She understood perfectly. She was no longer just a wife. She was a whistleblower, a target. They arranged to meet the next day, not at the IRS office, a place Jace could have watched, but at a discreet, out-of-the-way coffee shop in San Jose, a place where they would be just two more faces in the anonymous morning crowd. Agent Miller gave her a set of instructions, a protocol for their meeting that sounded like something out of a spy movie. He told her to bring the burner phone, but to handle it as little as possible, to preserve any potential fingerprints. He told her not to speak to anyone about their conversation, not her friends, not her family, and especially not her husband. "Mrs. Fenwick," he said, his voice a final solemn warning before they hung up, "from this moment on, you need to assume that you are being watched, that your calls are being monitored. You need to act as if everything is normal. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said, though the word felt like a lie. How could she act normal when her world had been turned upside down? How could she look her husband in the eye, knowing the depth of his betrayal, knowing that she had just set in motion the events that would destroy him? The rest of the night was a blur of sleepless, agonizing hours. She crept back into their bedroom, the burner phone clutched in her hand like a venomous snake. Jace was still asleep, his face peaceful in the soft glow of the moonlight, a picture of innocence that was a grotesque mockery of the truth. She slipped the phone back into its hiding place in his briefcase, her movements furtive and silent, like a thief in her own home. The next morning was an exercise in a kind of surreal high-stakes theater. Anna went through the motions of their morning routine, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She made coffee, her hands trembling so violently she nearly spilled the hot liquid on the cold white marble of the kitchen island. She sat across from Jace at their breakfast table, a granite slab that felt as cold and unforgiving as the chasm that had opened between them. He was in high spirits, animatedly discussing a new deal. He was closing his eyes, bright with the thrill of the chase. He was a master performer, his charm a weapon he wielded with effortless, deadly precision. He complimented her on her dress, a flowing maternity gown that was meant to look ethereal and serene, but now felt like a costume in a tragic play. He rested his hand on her belly, his touch a brand of fire on her skin, and spoke to their son, his voice filled with a paternal affection that turned her stomach. "Spencer, my boy," he said, his smile a dazzling display of white teeth. "Your dad is going to build you an empire." Anna forced a smile, a grotesque rictus that felt like it would crack her face in two. "He already has," she said, her voice a hollow echo of its former self. The hours until her meeting with Agent Miller stretched into an eternity. She feigned a headache, a common ailment in her third trimester, and retreated to her studio, the one place she could breathe. But her sanctuary now felt like a prison, the vibrant colors of her canvases a mocking reminder of a life that was no longer hers. At noon, she left for a fictitious doctor's appointment, a lie that slid off her tongue with a surprising, sickening ease. She was becoming a good liar. Jace had taught her that much. As she drove her Tesla down the winding roads of Atherton, the familiar landscape of manicured lawns and sprawling, opulent mansions felt alien and threatening. Every car behind her seemed to be following her, every passerby a potential spy. Was this what her life had become? A paranoid, high-stakes game of cat and mouse. The coffee shop in San Jose was a generic, soulless place, all beige walls and bland corporate art. It was the perfect setting for a clandestine meeting. Anna spotted Agent Miller immediately. He was the opposite of what she had expected. Not a grim-faced man in a black suit, but a surprisingly ordinary-looking man in his late 40s with thinning brown hair, a slightly rumpled polo shirt, and a kind, weary face. He looked more like a history teacher than a federal agent, a fact that was both disarming and reassuring. He rose as she approached, his handshake firm and steady. They sat in a secluded booth in the back, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. Anna's hands trembled as she slid the burner phone across the table, wrapped in a silk scarf from her purse. Agent Miller, whose first name was indeed David, didn't touch it. He simply looked at it, his expression unreadable. For the next 2 hours, Anna recounted her story again, this time in painstaking detail. David Miller listened intently, his pen scratching across a small government-issue notepad. He asked probing specific questions, his mind a sharp analytical instrument that cut through the fog of her emotional turmoil. He wanted dates, times, names, any small, seemingly insignificant detail she could remember. "This man, Mikhail," he said, his eyes sharp and focused. "You said you heard Jace on the phone with him. Can you remember anything specific that was said? Any phrases, any locations mentioned?" Anna's mind raced back to the hushed, late-night conversations she had overheard, the fragments of sentences that had been meaningless at the time, but now held a sinister significance. "I heard him mention Geneva," she said, the memory surfacing like a piece of wreckage from a sunken ship. "And something about a final transfer." He sounded stressed, more than I'd ever heard him before, almost scared. David Miller's pen scratched furiously. "Geneva," he repeated, a flicker of something that looked like confirmation in his eyes. "That's significant. That's very significant." He explained the process to her, the long, arduous road that lay ahead. The IRS, in conjunction with the Department of Justice and the FBI, would launch a full-scale investigation, a discreet but thorough examination of Jace's finances, his businesses, his entire life. They would use the information from the burner phone to obtain search warrants, to subpoena bank records, to unravel the complex web of his criminal enterprise. It would take months, perhaps even years. "And what about me?" Anna asked, her voice small. "What happens to me?" David Miller's expression softened, a hint of genuine empathy in his weary eyes. "We will do everything in our power to protect you, Mrs. Fenwick," he said. "But you need to be prepared. When this becomes public, it will be a media storm. Your life will be turned upside down. And your husband? Well, men like Jace Fenwick don't go down without a fight." He gave her a new phone, a prepaid, untraceable device. "This is for us to communicate," he said. "Don't use your regular phone to call me. Don't use your email. From now on, this is our only line of communication." As she left the coffee shop, the prepaid phone in her purse, a cold, hard reminder of her new reality, Anna felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The decision was made. The wheels were in motion. There was no turning back. She was no longer a victim of her husband's deceit. She was an agent of his downfall. The drive back to Atherton was a journey into the heart of the storm. As she pulled into the long, sweeping driveway of their mansion, she saw Jace's car parked in the front. He was home early. Her heart lurched, a cold fist of fear clenching in her stomach. Had he noticed the burner phone was missing? Did he suspect something? She walked into the house, her body a taut wire of tension. He was in the living room, a cavernous space with a grand piano and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the rolling hills of the California coast. He was standing by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his back to her. "Jace," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He turned, and the look on his face sent a chill down her spine. The charming, charismatic mask was gone. In its place was a cold, hard fury, an expression she had never seen before. It was the face of a predator. "Where were you, Anna?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. "I had a doctor's appointment," she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. He took a slow, deliberate step towards her, his eyes boring into hers, stripping her bare. "I called your doctor," he said, his voice a silken threat. "You didn't have an appointment today." Anna's blood ran cold. He knew. He didn't know everything, but he knew she had lied. The high-stakes game of cat and mouse had just escalated into a full-blown war, and she was standing on the front lines alone and unarmed in the heart of enemy territory. The fight for her future, for her son's future, had just begun, and she had a terrifying feeling that she was about to find out just how brutal and unforgiving that fight would be. The air in the living room crackled with a tension so thick Anna could taste it, metallic and sharp, like the tang of fear. Jace's eyes, usually a warm, reassuring blue, were now chips of ice-cold and unforgiving. The charming facade he presented to the world had crumbled, revealing the ruthless predatory core of the man she had married. Errands, he repeated, his voice a low, dangerous purr that sent a shiver down her spine. He took another step closer, invading her personal space, his size and presence suddenly menacing. The scent of expensive whiskey and his even more expensive cologne, a scent she had once found intoxicating, now felt cloying and suffocating. "You were gone for 3 hours, Anna. What kind of errands take 3 hours in this town?" Anna's mind was a blank, a canvas wiped clean by a wave of pure, unadulterated fear. She had underestimated him. She had foolishly believed she could play this game of deception, that she could live a double life under his roof. But Jace was a master of control, a man who left nothing to chance. Of course he had called her doctor. Of course he had been tracking her time. He treated their life like one of his business deals, monitoring every asset, every liability. And right now, she was his greatest liability. I went to the city," she stammered, her voice a fragile, trembling thing. "I was looking for a specific type of fabric for the baby's nursery. A vintage silk I saw online." The lie was weak, pathetic, and she knew it. A slow, cruel smile spread across Jace's face. It was a chilling reptilian expression that bore no resemblance to the dazzling smile he used to charm the world. "The city," he said, his voice dripping with a mock sincerity that was more terrifying than any shout. "Of course. You should have told me, my love. I would have sent a driver. You shouldn't be exerting yourself in your condition." His hand reached out, not to her belly this time, but to her face. His fingers, surprisingly cold, traced the line of her jaw. It was a gesture that was meant to be intimate, but felt like a threat, a silent assertion of ownership. "You've been acting strangely lately, Anna," he murmured, his thumb stroking her cheek in a parody of affection. "Distant, anxious. I've been worried about you." Anna's heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird, desperate for escape. She had to get away from him, away from his suffocating presence, his terrifying, all-seeing gaze. "I'm just tired," she said, trying to pull away from his touch. "The pregnancy, it's been difficult." She turned to leave, to retreat to the sanctuary of her studio, but his hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her wrist like a steel manacle. The suddenness and force of the action shocked her. "Don't walk away from me, Anna," he said, his voice no longer a purr, but a low, menacing growl that vibrated with barely suppressed rage. "We're not finished here." He pulled her towards him, his grip surprisingly strong. "I know you're lying to me," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "I can always tell when you're lying. It's in your eyes. A little flicker of fear. It's endearing in a way." He let go of her wrist, but she was still his captive, pinned by the intensity of his gaze. "I'm a very powerful man, Anna," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I have friends in very high places, and I have enemies, people who would love to see me fall. I need to know that I can trust you, that you're on my side. Are you on my side, Anna?" The question hung in the air between them, a loyalty test. She knew she had already failed. Her mind raced to the prepaid phone in her purse, a cold, hard object that felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. Had he searched her purse while she was out? Did he already know about David Miller? "Of course I'm on your side, Jace," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "I'm your wife." He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment, his eyes searching hers for any sign of deception. Then, to her astonishment, the tension in his body seemed to dissipate. The icy fury in his eyes receded, replaced by a look of weary concern. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. It was a performance, she realized, a calculated shift in tactics. "I'm sorry, my love," he said, his voice once again the warm, familiar tone she knew. "I'm just under a lot of pressure. This new merger is more complicated than I anticipated. I'm not myself." He pulled her into an embrace, his arms wrapping around her, in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt like the bars of a cage. "I love you, Anna," he whispered into her hair. "You and Spencer are my world. Everything I do for you." Anna stood rigid in his arms, her body a statue of fear and revulsion. He was a chameleon, a master of emotional manipulation. He could switch from menacing predator to loving husband in the blink of an eye, leaving her disoriented and doubting her own sanity. Was it possible she had overreacted, that the messages on the phone were just a misunderstanding? But then she remembered the cold, hard facts, the offshore accounts, the coded messages, the name Mikhail, the affair with Katya. No, this was not a misunderstanding. This was a man trying to control a situation that was spinning out of his grasp. He suspected something, but he didn't know what. And he was trying to lull her into a false sense of security, to draw her back into his web of lies. That night, sleep was an impossibility. Anna lay awake in their bed, her body a rigid line inches away from the man who was both her husband and her jailer. She listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, a sound that had once brought her comfort, but now filled her with a profound sense of dread. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Jace was the perfect husband, attentive, loving, and solicitous. He brought her breakfast in bed, massaged her swollen ankles, and spoke endlessly of their bright, happy future together. He was trying to suffocate her with kindness, to erase the memory of his brief, terrifying display of fury. But underneath the surface, the tension simmered. He watched her constantly, his eyes following her every move. He would casually ask about her day, his questions laced with a subtle, probing edge. He started coming home early, surprising her in her studio, his presence an unwelcome intrusion into her only sanctuary. Anna, in turn, played her part. She was the loving, appreciative wife, her smile a carefully constructed mask, her words a scripted performance. She communicated with David Miller in furtive, whispered conversations on the prepaid phone, hiding in the walk-in closet or the pantry, her heart pounding with the fear of discovery. David was a calming, steady presence in the chaos of her life. He assured her that the investigation was proceeding, that they were already making progress. They had subpoenaed the bank records for Project Nightingale and the Lazarus Fund. And what they were finding was even more audacious than they had imagined. "He's a ghost, Anna," David said, his voice a low murmur over the phone. "He's created a labyrinth of shell corporations so complex it's almost impossible to find him at the center. But he made one mistake, a small one, but it could be everything. He used his mother's maiden name, Rossi, as the signatory on one of the primary accounts. A sentimental fool. The detail was so small, so trivial, but it was the first crack in Jace's fortress of deceit. And it was enough to give Anna a flicker of hope. The strain of her double life was beginning to take its toll. She was losing weight despite the pregnancy. Dark circles formed under her eyes, a testament to her sleepless nights. She was jumpy, her nerves frayed, starting at every unexpected sound. She was living in a gilded cage, a beautiful, luxurious prison, and the walls were closing in. The breaking point came a week later. Jace announced a last-minute business trip to London. He would be gone for 3 days. The relief that washed over Anna was so intense it almost made her dizzy. 3 days of freedom. 3 days without his watchful eyes, his suffocating presence. 3 days to breathe. He left on a Tuesday morning, his kiss, a cold, perfunctory gesture on her cheek. "I'll miss you, my love," he said, his eyes lingering on her for a moment too long. "Be good." The words were a veiled threat, a reminder that even in his absence, she was still his prisoner. The moment his car disappeared down the long driveway, Anna sprang into action. She had a plan, a risky, desperate gamble that she had discussed with David Miller. She was going to find the physical proof. The documents, the ledgers, the hard copies that would corroborate the evidence on the burner phone. David had warned her against it, had told her it was too dangerous. But Anna knew she couldn't wait any longer. She was a woman on the edge, and she was done playing by the rules. She knew Jace had a hidden safe in his study. She had seen him use it once, a fleeting glimpse from the hallway. It was concealed behind a false panel, in the built-in mahogany bookcase, a secret compartment in a room filled with secrets. She had no idea what the combination was, but she had a suspicion, a gut feeling that was a product of 5 years of marriage to a man as arrogant and predictable as Jace Fenwick. She went to his study, a room that was the nerve center of his empire. It was a monument to his ego, all dark wood, leather-bound books, and expensive technology. Her hands trembled as she ran them along the spines of the books, searching for the hidden panel. She found it behind a first edition of The Great Gatsby, a book he often quoted, a story of self-made men and the dark side of the American dream. The irony was not lost on her. The panel slid open with a soft click, revealing the cold steel face of a digital safe. It was time to test her theory. Jace was a creature of habit, a man who believed in his own mythology. His passwords, his key codes, they were always a variation of the same few things. His birthday, their anniversary, the day he had founded Fenwick Holdings. She tried his birthday first. Access denied. Their anniversary. Access denied. The founding of his company. Access denied. A wave of despair washed over her. It was a fool's errand. The safe was impenetrable. She was about to give up when a new thought struck her. A memory from their early days, a conversation they had had on one of their first dates. He had told her about his first major real estate deal, the one that had launched his career. It was a date he had referred to as his real birthday, the day Jace Fenwick, the titan of industry, was born. August 14th, 2008. With trembling fingers, she punched in the date, 08144008. There was a soft beep and then a click. The safe was open. Anna's heart pounded as she swung open the heavy steel door. The contents were a testament to the two sides of Jace Fenwick. On one shelf were neat stacks of cash bundles of crisp $100 bills. On another were velvet boxes containing expensive watches and jewelry, a collection of his various trophies. But it was the bottom shelf that held what she was looking for. A series of black, leather-bound ledgers and a collection of USB drives neatly labeled with the same cryptic names as the offshore accounts: Project Nightingale, the Lazarus Fund, Mikhail. She had found it, the motherlode, the physical proof of his entire criminal enterprise. She grabbed the ledgers and the USB drives, her hands shaking with a mixture of terror and triumph. She was about to close the safe when something else caught her eye. A single plain manila envelope tucked away in the back. Her name was written on it in Jace's neat, precise handwriting. A cold dread washed over her. What was this? She opened the envelope, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. Inside was not a legal document or a financial statement. It was a set of photographs. Anna's breath hitched in her throat. The first photograph was of her taken from a distance. She was sitting in the coffee shop in San Jose at the table with David Miller. Her face was a mask of anxiety, her hand reaching for the burner phone. The second photograph was of David Miller, a close-up of his face as he left the coffee shop. The third was a picture of her car, her license plate clearly visible, parked outside the anonymous building. The last item in the envelope was not a photograph, but a printout of a call log. Her calls to David Miller from the prepaid phone. The dates, the times, the durations, all meticulously documented. He knew. He had known all along. The business trip to London was a lie. He had set a trap, and she had walked right into it. He hadn't just been watching her. He had hired someone to watch her. A professional. A wave of nausea so intense it nearly buckled her knees washed over her. She stumbled back the photographs, falling from her nerveless fingers and scattering across the plush oriental rug. The room, once a symbol of his power, now felt like a tomb. And then she heard it. The soft, familiar click of the front door opening and closing. He was home. He had never been in London. He had been waiting, watching, playing with her, like a cat with a mouse. And now he was coming for her. Anna's mind went into overdrive. The ledgers, the USB drives, they were still in her hand. She had the evidence. But she was trapped. Trapped in a house with a man who was more dangerous, more ruthless than she had ever imagined. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, each one a hammer blow against her heart. She was in his study, the scene of her crime, the evidence of her betrayal clutched in her hands. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The doorknob began to turn. In that split second, as the door began to swing open, Anna Fenwick made a decision. She was not a victim. She was not a mouse to be toyed with. She was a woman fighting for her life and for the life of her child. She grabbed the heaviest object on his desk, a bronze statue of a bull, a symbol of Wall Street, of the very world Jace worshipped. It was heavy, solid, a weapon. The door swung open and Jace stood there, his face a mask of cold, triumphant rage. "Looking for something, my love," he said, his voice a silken, terrifying threat. And in that moment, Anna Fenwick, the pregnant wife of a millionaire, did the one thing he had never expected her to do. She fought back. With a primal scream that was a mixture of fear, rage, and a mother's fierce protective instinct, she lunged forward, swinging the bronze bull with all her might. The fairy tale was over. The game was over. This was not a story of a broken heart. It was a story of survival. And Anna Fenwick was determined to be the one left standing. Anna's story is a chilling reminder that the most picturesque lives can hide the darkest secrets. It's a story about the corrosive nature of deceit and the extraordinary courage it takes to stand up for the truth, even when it means burning your own world to the ground. She didn't just expose a criminal. She reclaimed her life and secured a future for her son built on honesty, not on the fragile foundation of a lie. Her journey from a millionaire's wife to a federal whistleblower shows that true strength isn't about the wealth you have, but the integrity you choose. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of betrayal, courage, and ultimate justice resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a real-life drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories you won't want to miss. Click that notification bell so you never miss an upload.